my name's Bryony Knox. I'm a silversmith. I've been working in metal for about 30 years. I love all different scales of metalwork and different types of metalwork. And so when I first started, I went to Wolverhampton Uni near Birmingham, and I did a 3D design course that was wood, metals and plastics, and I'd never worked in any of those materials before, and I actually thought it was wood that I was going to want to work in, but I just realised it didn't suit my temperament. I'm not a measurer, I'm not super precise, and that metal is much more forgiving, and I realise I'm a bit of a basher. I just love what metal can do and how malleable it is and what you can do with it. And then I love interaction. So I used to make automata, and you wind a handle and something moved. And then I went to Glasgow to do a master's, and I was making gates that when you opened them, something moved as well, but all still in metal. But I realised that jewellery was too small, gates were too big, and I really like working in this scale, so I tended to sort of start working in this scale. And so I made the things that I was teaching yesterday, these little metal mice. Those are things that I made in my first 5 years of business, and I used to sell them in galleries up and down the country. And I've probably made about 500 or 600 of those mice over the years. And I loved it at the time, and it taught me about batch production and how to make things in a certain time and a certain price range. I wanted something that was very accessible for people to be able to buy, and I would do trade fairs and bring out ranges, and I really enjoyed it. I used to make little brooches that had automata in them as well. But I realised that after a while I'd got them down to the quickest way of making them because of the idea of batch production, but I'd actually stopped all the enjoyment. There was the skill for me had started to disappear. I wasn't really using the skills that I'd learned at uni. And I really missed a technique called chasing and repoussé, which is sort of slightly similar to what we're doing today, which is how you emboss and really change the flow of a metal. When you're using chasing and repoussé, you're using a bowl of pitch and you're hammering it with tools. So we're using a much thinner metal today, but you're getting the same idea of how you could get that decoration in. And I just really miss that technique. And so it's a very time-consuming technique, and it means that you're making things that are quite expensive, which I'd sort of shied away from after leaving uni because I was too nervous about making things that were thousands of pounds. Where would you sell them? How would you do that? But after about 5 years of being out of uni, I applied to Goldsmiths Fair with things that I had started to make, and was very fortunate to get in, and it just totally, I started then to work in silver, and it changed the scale and the price of things. So I now make one-off, quite expensive bespoke things that take maybe a month to make or 6 weeks to make, but they still have elements of movement. I want people to use things, but they have movement as they use them, and so there's still that feeling of play. But it's a very different end of the craft market. So for me, that's why I enjoy teaching the mice and the copper boxes and things, because it's much more immediate, and it gives people a sort of introduction to how metal can work. And then if they want to progress, they can start to make things in more expensive materials or more durable materials. But I love the fact that metal can be all these things. It can be a lovely tiny brooch or a ring that moves, or it can be a huge gate or something. And I enjoy that I don't have to be tied to a certain scale or a certain metal. I even teach in recycled tin. I used to do lots of work in recycled tin. And it's just so immediate, that you can get the feeling of metal, but you're just cutting it with scissors, and so you can do it in schools and in colleges and things very quickly. So yeah, it's such a variety of materials. But it's all metal, so it's great. You're making something that nobody else has, and it's stretching your brain and your creativity, and there's no one say, oh no, you can't make that. You can make something that other people think is totally ridiculous. It doesn't matter, it's yours. You can design it, you can make it. I think it also, when I first started learning about metal, I'd never done any metalwork until I went to uni, and it just made me really appreciate the things that were around me. I suddenly thought, oh, right, that's cast, that's spun, that's, I had no idea. I remember, it's so silly, but I just didn't, when I was told you could make screws, you could use a tap and die set and make your own screws, I was just like, something as daft as that was so exciting because it just gave you an appreciation for the things that are around, appreciation for things that you see in in museums, and especially the technique that I specialise in, chasing and repoussé, is thousands of years old. So you see there's this amazing bowl called the Gunderstrup cauldron, which is a huge silver panel cauldron. It's 450 BC, but it's using the exact same techniques and tools that I use today. There's hardly anything different, and I find that just mind-blowing. And it means that when you go to museums or see pieces and you see the hammer mark, you think, oh, they've used that hammer or they've used that tool, and then you have that connection with the person that's made that, and that is, not many, you don't get that from a plastic cup. Even you sit in the sand and you start doodling, or it's sort of and I love the fact that in metal it's so permanent. I'm fascinated by glass, and I've tried a few things in ceramics. They're just not my materials. It's really interesting. I just can't get to grips with them. And also the fact that you could spend hours making something and then it could blow up in the kiln, or you could just drop it. I just couldn't bear that. You can spend hours on something metalwork and you can drop it. And if either it bounces, or if there's a wee dent, you just hammer it back out again. It's how do we actually train young people in these skills when people are interested in them, and people, there's definitely still a client base wanting to buy things, but we actually need to make sure we can actually train people and pass on these skills. I know lots of people that I learnt from that are the generation above me in their sort of 60s and 70s who are saying, there's just not enough people coming up through either through art colleges or through apprenticeships to actually take on those skills and learn those specific skills, and I find it quite scary that and I wish that there was more money put into college, or making it more accessible and easier to actually learn and train. Whether it's through apprenticeships or technical colleges or universities, or just some means that people can actually get their hands on and learn from someone else. And that's it, just literally hands on. You can spend hours designing something, but you actually need to make it. The joy of my job is I get to design something and make it. I wanted to make sure that I didn't just design things and get someone else to make it, or I didn't make someone else's designs. Actually that follow through, I think, is so important, because there's a joy in both sides. So I mean, I certainly within the silversmiths that I know, there's a real emphasis on trying to make sure that we teach each other the skills that we can show. So there's peer-on-peer learning, and that we all try and teach a lot as well. I really enjoy teaching. I teach in my studio, students, but also people that have just never done any metalwork, and adults who are interested, because you just never know where it's going to take people. But it also just gives a bit of enjoyment. But for it to be your career, there's definitely a certain amount you can just by practice and experience you can teach yourself, but you really need people to give you guidance and to get you going, and so that's why it's so important to have art colleges, and actually also see people that are teaching you that actually use it in their practice as well, so that this can be a career. I had no idea that silversmith was a job at all when I was at school. I didn't know it existed. So I try and go into schools and say, this is a path that you could do. Whereas so often told, the usual sort of doctor, nurse. No one says, oh no, you can make metal automata. No, just to show that there are so many paths, and there are, even within metalwork, there are so many paths. I've made trophies, I've made rings, I've made engagement rings, I've made all sorts of crazy things. I've worked for big corporate things making stuff for their advertising, but it's all metal. So there's so many different paths you can take. So it's just trying to show people that there's all these possibilities. So I'm 50, and I'd say most of my peers that are silversmiths are women. And the generation above me, and this is quite generalistic, but most of them are men. So something has happened dramatically in that time, and I think that a lot of that is art college training. So that's amazing. You know, so many people are coming through, and realising that it is a possibility, and the British silver is thriving. You know, Goldsmiths Fair is a great selling place. There's lots of amazing silversmiths in Britain, and you know, people are coming from other countries to learn here, but we just got to make sure we've actually still got the courses and the ability to actually do the training. So it's at this sort of exciting, scary stage where, you know, the possibilities are there, and the clients are generally there, but it's just making sure we don't lose the training. Today we're working in very thin copper, so you can literally just cut it with scissors, but you can still, we're going to play around this afternoon about how you can colour it, how you can heat it with colour it with heat, and how you can colour it with oxidisation, and just seeing what the properties actually of that metal do. So that'll be fun.